you just go right to the left. But thank you for coming today. We'll go ahead and start our program.
Come on, Kara.
Come on, Kara. Okay, cool. Good morning. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Kara. I am a licensed master social worker. I'm also a certified grief recovery specialist. And this morning I will be discussing how anxiety presents itself in teens and just different ways we can support them. So I wanted to talk about why might your teen be anxious first. And by talking about that, I actually want to share my own kind of story in that area, as I grew up a very, very anxious teen. I started having issues with chronic anxiety when I was in elementary school, and they continued to snowball through high school. I was in a very competitive high school, and I was also in a very competitive music program, and so during marching band season, I would literally lose like 20 to 40 pounds during every season because of the anxiety. I literally couldn't eat. It was that bad. And so I would have trouble sleeping, I would have trouble eating, I was very tense all the time, more irritable, all sorts of issues were going on. And it wasn't until my mom insisted I go and see a therapist through Children's Hospital that I realized that this was actually a pretty big issue. And so when I did engage in therapy, the skills I've actually learned in that therapy session, or those therapy sessions years and years ago, are actually skills I still think about to this day. So it really had a profound impact on my life. And so this is a topic that I've gotten really passionate about because even working with teens, as one of my previous internships was in primary care, I worked with teens in the middle of the pandemic, and just the sheer anxiety level was really astounding to me. And so I think this is an area that's only become more prevalent with the pandemic. And so it's something that I really want to kind of help focus on in ways we can support our teens through that. So when it comes to fear and when it comes to anxiety, it becomes a little different as we age. So for example, when I was first experiencing anxiety in elementary school, my big fears were tornadoes and home intruders. We had a tornado scare when I was in second grade, and every night after that I would wake my parents up and tell them a tornado was coming. And then one night I stayed up way too late and watched Crime Stoppers on accident, and I was terrified of home intruders for like the next year. So my fears were, at that age, about 8 or 9, were external. They were, something's gonna happen to the house, something's gonna happen to my parents, something could happen to me physically, something could happen. I remember being in the tornado drill and crying because I thought my pets were gonna die. Like, things were gonna happen to my pets. It was all external fears. Whereas as we age and start getting into puberty and start getting into that high school teen age, our fears move into the more internal realm, whereas it's our emotional and intellectual fears of the social pressures. Who are we? What's our identity? How do people perceive us? How do we perceive ourselves? What do we actually enjoy? What do we actually want with our lives? All of these internal fears of who we actually are. So our fears kind of move from the external to the internal, especially as we start entering high school. So I wanted to focus on that a little bit more by discussing a little bit of Erikson's 8 stages. So Erikson was a very famous psychologist. He wrote these 8 stages. And what happens with these stages is there's either kind of a success or a failure with it. So trust versus mistrust happens in infancy. It's the idea of forming basic trust versus not trusting those caring for them. So that's kind of found in, like, if you are holding your infant or loving your infant, taking care of them, they usually develop trust. Autonomy versus shame is, are they learning to do things on their own? Are you letting them trust themselves or try different things, or are they developing shame because they feel like they can't do anything on their own? Initiative versus guilt is usually that stage where kids are asking questions nonstop, like they literally will not stop asking questions. And so that stage can be if they are kind of having those questions answered, if there's patience there, if they feel like they can take that initiative and ask all those different questions and learn, versus feeling guilty about kind of having that curiosity. And industry versus inferiority is them kind of forming that self-identity in their school life, getting homework done, building relationships, kind of forming a schedule, forming a routine, kind of forming industry, as they call it, versus inferiority of feeling like they can't take care of themselves in that way. So the one I wanted to focus on with teens is the idea of identity versus confusion. And so this usually happens from about age 12 through 18, and I could honestly argue that it goes on farther through college. So the idea of identity versus confusion is this is the moment in their lives where they are forming their self-perceived identity, what they like, what their personal style is, the music they like, and even deeper, things like their sexuality, things like their personal identity, things their convictions, their personal beliefs, their value system. It all becomes kind of a priority during this stage. So there can be a lot of anxiety in that area as there's so many different pressures coming at them where they're trying to figure it out for themselves, but they have all these different ideas kind of coming at them of what that could look like. So there can be a lot of anxiety because not only are they trying to get through their day-to-day life, they're also trying to figure out who they are at the same time. Then you add on the hormonal differences and things like that, it just can add to that anxiety a lot more. So these are the issues that I think kind of affect that identity making and these teen perspectives. So the external forces we see are things like social media, and social media is huge. And I think I can go both ways on how it can be beneficial, but I can also go on the other end of the spectrum and say how it cannot be beneficial. Social media can allow teens to understand that there are other perspectives outside their own. They can understand what else is kind of out there, help them kind of gain an understanding of who they are. It can also help them find community as far as people who enjoy the same things they do or think the same way that they do. But on the other hand, it can also expose them to things that make them even more anxious about their identity or cause them to feel inferior or that they're not doing enough, not moving enough, all sorts of issues. They might be getting hit with too many perspectives at once. World issues is a huge one also, and it's also perpetuated a lot through social media. I think generationally, younger folks have gotten more and more involved in world issues, and so I think just because it's easier to be exposed to it through media, we just see everything. It's almost like if you don't know about what's going on in Yemen or Syria, like you're out of touch. And so there's a lot of issues that teens are affected by, which I think causes them to be more empathetic, but can also cause a lot of anxiety as we can feel helpless in that situation. News, ads, media, we take in so much information every day. I would argue that we in this room take in more information in a day than many of our ancestors did in their lifetime. And so I think that has a huge impact on the way teens think and process things because it's kind of an information overload. And then social pressures, your typical, school day-to-day, trying to fit in, trying to figure out who they are at the same time. I mean, we go into our work day, if for those of us who work in office or work every day, and we have our coworkers and we want to keep a good impression around them. And if things go wrong and we don't like the people we work with or we really don't want to work with the people we work with, we can leave our job, whereas teens it's different because they can't really leave the school that they're in. They can't really leave that environment, so they have to find a way to adapt and work with it, and that can cause a ton of anxiety as well, depending on their environment they're in. Like I know even this school, this is Mason, has a very high emphasis on academics and can be a lot of pressure. And so every school is different as far as like what kind of environment they push, and that can lead to a lot of anxiety. The internal forces are like a pre-existing anxiety condition. So for somebody like me that already had a pre-existing anxiety condition, it makes you a lot more vulnerable to those stressors that you're trying to adapt to. And then a small picture versus big picture perspective. I think as we age, we develop a more big picture perspective where we kind of see things longitudinally. We understand that there are bills to be paid, there are things to do, there are things we're looking forward to later in life, whereas for a teen, their exposure is a little bit more limited, so their life looks like more their day-to-day rather than the big picture of their life. And so that can cause a lot of anxiety as well. So some symptoms of anxiety in teens, I wanted to dig into this a little bit because I think it's a little bit different from adults. There's some similarities and there's some differences. So a big one is poor concentration. And so this can lead to issues with grades, it can lead to issues with school, it can lead to issues in being engaged at home, all sorts of issues because there are so many things racing thoughts-wise running through your head all the time when you're experiencing anxiety that it's very difficult to be engaged and concentrating. Poor sleep is a big one. You'll see a lot of insomnia, people getting up multiple times per night. Nightmares can be a definite symptom. Poor quality of sleep, and this can affect your teen's mood as sleepy teens are tough sometimes. Lashing out, I think when you're experiencing anxiety, it's a very intense kind of emotional situation to be in all the time, and it's also exhausting. And so when that pressure, especially if you don't know how to talk about it, that pressure can cause you to snap and lash out. Some teens isolate because anxiety will tell you, like, nobody understands what you're going through, nobody wants to know what you're going through, you're alone in this, stay alone, like, isolate yourself. Shutting down can come from anxiety that the authority figure or parent figure will not understand what's going on, or will turn it into a lesson, or will turn it into a lecture, and so they can shut down because they don't feel like they can trust the person that they might be going to for their anxiety. Feeling tense, that body's fight or flight system is always going, there's always some adrenaline. That's a part of your body called the sympathetic nervous system where you are in this kind of fight or flight stage of what do I need to do to survive, and so there's always a feeling of tenseness because your body is constantly prepared to do what it has to do to survive in that situation. Feeling fidgety, it's kind of the same thing as feeling tense, where you have all this extra energy from the adrenaline rush you're getting from that sympathetic nervous system. So they may be fidgeting in class, they may be fidgeting at the dinner table, they might just be very restless because that anxiety has no outlet at that point. It's not only in their mind, but it's in their body. Crying spells can happen. It's not just when a teen is feeling depressed or down, but when they are really afraid or really anxious, they might start crying. And then panic attacks are also a very prevalent one that we see. I actually suffered panic attacks growing up. They kind of stopped around college. And these can occur when that fight or flight is just in overdrive. So trouble breathing, trouble talking about what's going on. They might start sweating, they might start shaking, they could be shivering, feeling very overwhelmed, they might start crying, very tense. And so those are definitely a symptom that we see with intense anxiety. Some teens need constant reassurance or validation, so kind of the opposite of the isolation. And some might also form an intense attachment because they're afraid of the anxiety that comes with having to do things on their own. So here's just a few ways to support your teen. I mean, I think it is easier said than done because at the end of the day, like, we do have to be cognitive of what kids want and what they're willing to accept. And so I think there's ways to help, but there's no like exact right way to help a teen. I think the first one is encouraging them to talk about it because it's probably running in their head all the time. A training I recently went to, we were doing grief training with each other, and we had to work with partners, and one of the discussions they had was, let yourself be a heart with eyes, ears, and no mouth. So we were not allowed to, when the other person was sharing, we weren't allowed to like make any exclamations or even like validate them in the moment while they were sharing. It was all about just listening. And so listening with your heart rather than your mind, I think is a great way to start. And then putting yourself in their shoes, like if I was 16 or 17 and I was going through the situation, like would I be anxious too? Or when I was 17, like what was I like really nervous about? Or 15, or what was a situation that felt like, looking back, seemed irrational, but was really anxiety inducing for me. Like for me, when I got my temps license, I failed the first time, but then to like register for this thing, I had to have an ID, and so my mom signed me up for the temps test again, and I had a breakdown about it because I was so nervous about failing. And it seems irrational now, but it was really anxiety inducing for me because it felt like such a big deal. And then validate their fears, validate the fact that, yeah, that does seem scary, that is scary, that it's really difficult. Thank you for telling me. That's really like, how can I help you, or what can I do to make it a little bit easier for you? Validate the fact that it is scary so that they know you understand that this is a scary thing for them. Another one is to integrate coping skills into your household. Make coping skills a daily routine as part of your household. So modeling healthy coping skills is a great way to start. So that could be deep breathing, or mindfulness, or exercise, things like that, that your teen just sees you do it, not that you're teaching them how to do it, but that they just see you using these coping skills in your day-to-day that helps them grow and building their own set of coping skills. Creating an environment that promotes safety, so that's mainly, kind of goes back to encouraging them to talk, just helping them find a way to learn how to confide in you. And then capitalizing on strengths is a big one. Capitalize on the ways that your teen is doing well, things that they're doing great, strengths that they have that they probably aren't noticing for themselves, but that you might notice in their day-to-day. Just letting them know that you are really proud of them, and that they have different strengths, just so that they start building their own self-confidence to battle that anxiety. And then utilize resources. So helping your teen find a therapist. There's some different ways to do that. One of the ways I really like is going through your primary physician. Typically, they may have a resource sheet with a list of therapy sources that you can use. Discussing and considering medication. Now, medication, I consider it more of a resource. It's not a requirement. It's not a fix-all, but there may be a situation where it might be useful, and that is okay. Medication is not meant to be used typically long-term. It can be used in the short term. And then helping your teen find a mentor, just somebody that they can see in their day-to-day life that may not be you, that they might be able to confide in as well. So to go a little bit more into the types of resources, the therapy model that I actually typically recommend with teens and anxiety especially is called CBT. CBT stands for Cognitive Behavioral Therapy, and the idea of cognitive behavioral therapy is that we have certain ways of thinking that help us in our day-to-day life survive. We've developed these ways of thinking to get through our lives, and they work until they don't. And so the idea of CBT is that when you learn how to reprocess your modes of thinking, your negative thoughts, anything like that, you actually form new neural pathways, and building a habit in that area actually becomes easier. So it helps reprocess thoughts to induce new habits of thinking. So that is working with typically what are automatic negative thoughts, the negative thoughts we have on a daily basis, and working to reprocess them so that we're not looking at them in a positive light necessarily, but just from a more realistic standpoint, instead of kind of going each or other way. SSRIs, when I talked a little bit about medication earlier, that is a class of medication that is typically prescribed for anxiety. It stands for serotonin selective reuptake inhibitor. It works with serotonin kind of to help keep it in the brain. It can be prescribed by a general doctor or psychiatrist. That one, when it comes to medication, I never recommend for or against it. I just believe that it's something worth having a discussion about with your physician. Journaling, I think, is a great resource when it comes to anxiety, especially for teens when they're just thinking of a lot of stuff at once. There are so many journaling resources now that have prompts where instead of just getting sat down with a sheet of paper, they can actually have a question or a set of questions to help kind of work through that anxiety on their own and be able to get everything down on paper. And then mindfulness is another practice. So mindfulness kind of encompasses any practice that really engages the brain or the mind without necessarily being a distraction. So like watching TV isn't necessarily mindfulness, but going for a walk and maintaining awareness of what you're seeing or what you're smelling, things like that, that is mindfulness. So mindfulness actually helps signal the body to calm down. It actually helps that parasympathetic nervous system, which is kind of the brake in the situation. And there's a lot of different mindfulness resources, either on YouTube, there's millions of guided meditations, there's also quite a few mindfulness apps out there as well. So what I wanted to do real quick is just go through a quick CBT exercise just to give you an idea of what CBT kind of looks like in practice. So something that you can go through yourself. There's a lot of CBT resources online, but there's also CBT counselors, and these are the kinds of worksheets and homework projects that they go through as well. I actually have it on a handout in your packet, is an exact set of questions if you want to go through it. So I'd like you to think about this in the mindset of a teen or your teen, and maybe something they've told you they're worried about, or maybe something they might be worried about in their day-to-day. So the first question is just, what is something you're worried about? Write it down, write it down or speak it out to whoever you're talking to. And then the next question is actually in a CBT category called putting your thoughts on trial, which is where you basically present the evidence for or against the thing that you're worried about. So what are some clues that your worry will not come true? Either what are some things that have happened in the past where you've been successful in this area? You can help your teen remind themselves of what specific qualities they have that will help them get through the situation. You can help them identify ways that you will support them, that will help them that worry not come true, or just help them understand that here's where all the different evidences against your worry are coming into play. On the other hand, you can also discuss with them what's some evidence that it will come true, to really kind of dig into what else might you actually be worried about happening in the situation. And that can also help you identify some problem points where support would be really helpful. If their worry does not come true, what will happen instead? What is kind of not necessarily the best case scenario, the absolute best thing that could possibly happen, but realistically what is most likely to happen in this situation? And then if your worry does come true, how will you handle it? What will you need support from as far as from us as your parents, or what will you need support in as far as kind of getting through this period, or like if the worst case scenario does happen, how will you be able to handle it? And I think after discussing all of that, I think a great kind of debriefing question is, after answering all of these questions, has your worry changed? How do you see what you're worried about now? Do you feel a little better? Do you feel worse at all? Why would you feel worse? What could we do to help you there? And I think those are a great set of questions. Not even, you don't have to do it exactly that way, but I think they're just good conversation points of, what could happen, and how can we support you through that? And that's just kind of an example of CBT therapy. It's just the idea of kind of helping work with specific thoughts to help reprocess them and rebrand them so that you can kind of move through the situation a little bit easier, instead of kind of diving into the automatic negative worry, be able to kind of dig into a little bit more of a rational train. So that is what I have. Check my time. So I've got about 24 minutes out of 30. I can answer a question or two if anybody has anything. Yeah?
Do we have access to these slides?
If you would like, I can send an email to you. I'd be happy to send that to you, yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
What would you recommend, what's the best time to talk about CBT? Obviously, I'm thinking it's, in the moment, most likely they are not going to be interested unless you do it right now.
Yeah, I agree. I think, There's definitely going to be moments where more of a first aid approach is going to be, and I think that's when the validation kind of really comes in of, you know, it is scary, this is scary. Because I think if you dig into the CBT, like right in the moment when they're really heightened, it's going to become more of like a lecturing period or feel, like they might feel more attacked. And so I think more of a debrief, like if you eat dinner with them or just, I think recreational family time when they're enjoying themselves or you're just catching up with them, just so that it's framed more as like a support rather than in the moment like a lecture or feeling interrogated in a sense.
How do you help teens with the amount of social media they personally consume?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a good question. Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is, I think our own perspectives on it do shift a little bit as far as, you know, where it can be helpful. I think, you know, as much as teens get upset about this, like even removing the phone before bed or things like that, just to get, like late night scrolling is, I mean, there's an idea, it's called like doom scrolling or revenge scrolling, where when people feel like they don't have enough time to themselves during the day, like we work all day, we'll make up that time like late at night and wake up very much more tired in the morning. I think just having, I think it first comes with a discussion of not necessarily that I think that it's not that we don't trust you, because I think when it comes to like limiting phone time, I think the automatic assumption is that our teens believe we don't trust them with something, that they're doing something wrong. Whereas I think just discussing like there is so much going on and I want to talk about it with you, but we might need to limit this a little bit just for the sake of limiting that anxiety, especially if your teen has chronic kind of consistent anxiety. I think that would be a really good thing to limit, especially at night, just because of all that vulnerability that you experience when you're tired. You'll wake up anxious the next day, especially because you're still thinking about what you were scrolling through. When I worked in primary care and I would have people be anxious about COVID with me, I literally had to tell people that you have to stop watching the news. So it applies to adults just as much as it does to teens. But I think it really comes down to that discussion first of helping your teen find their trigger and helping them form a game plan with that trigger as far as their anxiety, so that they understand it's not because we think you're on that dang phone too much, or that we don't trust you. It's because this is an actual way to help you beat your trigger. I think the more your teen understands your anxiety and what's causing it, I think they'll be more open to limiting some of the things that trigger them as well.
One more in that.
Oh, yes.
So I work with some preteens, I work with sixth graders as
Mhm.
well, and I know that some of them also have some test anxiety, and so I was wondering, do you think that this would be good, like right before testing, for some that really, like, they'll just sit there and break down and cry?
Yeah.
This particular worksheet, maybe for some, just to fill out right before
Yeah.
testing.
Yeah.
For them to go through it, and then maybe we have a conversation, just like the week before testing or something, so that they can go through and process and work through
Yeah.
those emotions that they're feeling.
Yeah, I definitely think that would be a great tool. I also wonder if even before a test begins, pulling up a guided meditation or something, not where they're just like sitting in silence, like just thinking the whole time, but there's a lot of them where they have you do visualization, and so I think even helping calm down the nervous system before they even take a test would be helpful as well.
So as parents, we have our own anxieties too. So
Yes.
how much of those anxieties is comfortable sharing with our teens?
Mhm.
So that you don't cross the boundaries.
Right. I think definitely, I think it's great to let your teen know that there are things you're anxious about too. I mean, obviously, not being like, you make me anxious or like anything that
You're my issue. That'll make them feel so
But I
good.
think even sharing like stories of when you were their age and things that made you anxious at their age, not in a way to like turn it into a lesson, but just like, yeah, this happened to me and I was so embarrassed, or I was so anxious about this and this happened, or, you know, I think even just like a random story of, yeah, I was at the BMV yesterday and I forgot a document and I was super nervous about it. Like just like small things. I mean, they can only handle, I think, so much at certain ages, but just moments where like you let them know like it's a human experience to feel anxiety. We feel it as parents too. It's something we do, and then maybe even branching off into how you kind of coped with it a little bit of like, I was at the BMV, I forgot a document, I was really anxious about it, I explained to them, they told me I could email it, I took care of it, and I did a few deep breaths in the car and we drove home. Just some ways to help them understand like, we're human, this is a human experience. I feel it too, and because I experience it, it actually helps me help you with that experience a little bit as well.
That gives me a question. So, how do you balance with teens especially? I think that whole identity thing, that was really helpful for me, when you shared about that. You know, they're trying to figure out what they think and who they are, and they have so many ideas coming at them, and they kind of try on different hats, and they're not really sure. But I struggle in some of my conversations with my teens with the idea of normalizing some of their thoughts, right? Like, these are normal anxieties.
Yeah.
But sometimes that helps them.
Yeah.
And sometimes it makes them feel like, no, you don't understand. Like, my feelings about this are unique. You know, like they have that, like.
Yeah.
And so I don't always know when it's helpful to say, you know what, everybody has these kinds of thoughts. That's normal. You know, there are ways to deal with them versus like making them feel like I'm not really hearing and listening because their feelings about something they feel like are unique.
Yeah, I think in that scenario, like validating the individual experience of like, it makes sense for you to feel this way in this exact situation, or I can understand how this would have this kind of impact on you specifically. And then maybe even like following up with a question, like another question to kind of deeper understand, just so that you're signaling like, this is not about like, oh, everybody experiences it. And I mean, I think it's really good to know that because it helps people feel less alone, but it can also help, I think, especially with the whole identity thing, we feel really misunderstood when people generalize us. And so I think continuing that with a specific question of like, well, what makes you feel specifically that way? Or how does that aspect of your identity kind of impact you further? Or how have you felt since discovering this about yourself? Like just things like that where it's like kind of more geared towards their specific experience. Okay, I am out of time. Thank you guys so much. If you would like, just come to me and send me your email or tell me your email and I'll send this right over to you.
I know it's early, so I will do some big stretches. It's early in the morning. I'm trying to stay awake myself. So if you want to just do some big stretches, just to stretch your body out, get comfortable. Gonna talk about some trauma, so that's fine. So I'm really excited to present this because this has been, the information that I'm going to share has been definitely life-changing for me. I definitely wish I would have known this and my mom would have known these things growing up and just the difference it would have made in our life in general. So I'm going to talk about understanding mental health and trauma impact on your teens. So my goal is to learn from our past, to heal our present, to protect our future. Got this thing on the timer. So who am I? Most of you know I'm Erica Brown. I am a licensed social worker and I'm also a certified clinical trauma specialist. And I'm also an individual who suffered from mental illness myself. I currently work as an outpatient therapist at Public Behavioral Health. And the population that I treat is teens all the way to elderly with no age limit. Some of the disorders that I treat are bipolar disorders, depressive disorders, PTSD, trauma, anxiety, personality disorders, including psychosis, ADHD, OCD, think of it, I probably do it, it's not a substance abuse. So my purpose for today is to teach the impact of trauma on teens' minds, bodies, souls, and relationship through understanding what trauma is, the impact on generations, the impact on our bodies, and healing through connection. So what is trauma? Trauma can be defined by the 3 E's, the event, the experience, and the effect, meaning an event or ongoing experience or situation that you experienced directly, witnessed, or inherited that had a damaging effect on your well-being. And so when I say directly experience or witness, we understand, but I'm going to talk a little bit more about the inherited experience that affects our well-being. So ACEs, which is Adverse Childhood Experience. If you have your phones out, I'll just say get that prepared because I have a little bit of an activity after I explain what this is. So ACEs is the result from a study that was done on one of the biggest research on childhood abuse and neglect. They did this study on 17,000 participants, and they looked at what was some common experience across these participants that affect, their goal was to see the link between an adverse childhood experience on health. So these were some of the main 10 areas where they found that these experiences does have a direct link to our physical health as well as our mental health. So if you go into a good doctor, you may notice that they're asking more depressive questions like, are you depressed? Do you feel laid down? Or do you feel like hard to sleep? So you may notice that now going on at the doctor, but it came from the study. So some of the ACEs, of course, is physical abuse, we understand that. But emotional abuse, this is one that is kind of not talked about a lot. We know like cursing your kids out or downplaying them or degrading them, but some of the other emotional abusive statement like go in your room and cry, nobody wants to hear that. Or like boys not supposed to cry, like tough it out, men don't cry, hold in your emotions, hold it together, you're the man of the house. Or with girls, body shaming girls, teaching them that their body is a form of temptation rather than a temple. And so making passive statements about that. Being a hovering parent and being obsessive about what your kids wear, what they're eating. So just having too much control over their normal well-being. So that can be emotional damage. So these are not necessarily abusive, but they can have a damaging impact on your child's well-being. So I just wanted to give a little bit more on that. And then sexual abuse, we pretty much understand that one. Physical neglect, like not feeding them, not taking them to the doctor, things like that. And then emotional neglect, kind of like that example of go to your room and cry, or not exploring when they tell you, or not giving them attention when they're trying to express their feelings to you, being on your phone, really not being present for them emotionally. Having your own mental illness and not getting it treated. Watching your mother be treated violently, but I also think men can be also victims of domestic violence, so I just wanted to throw that out there. Divorce, or your parents not being together, maybe separated, or never actually being a whole family. Having a family member that's incarcerated, and substance abuse. So how does this impact behavior? So it increased the risk of lack of physical activity, so you may see your teen sleeping more, or not want to engage in things, and not enjoying like things that they used to may play in their video game all at once, and then not wanting to touch it again. They want to go hang out with friends, and then all of a sudden they just want to be in the room and withdraw. Smoking, alcoholism, drug use, lack of work, so miss assignments, not wanting to do their work, not wanting to go to school. And this is for adults, but I'm explaining what it can look like in your teens. And physical health, it can lead to obesity, diabetes, depression, suicide attempts, STDs, heart disease, cancer, stroke, COPD, which is a lung disease that you get from smoking, and broken bones. So like you've seen more accidents in your kids if they have a history of trauma. But also this is not just good for your kids, it's good for you to understand, and going back to learning from our past so that we can heal our present. As you can see that as adults, I'm sure when you saw some of those, you probably like, I didn't do that. And understanding that this is also something like understanding your trauma to understand how it impacts your physical and mental health. Kind of like what you were saying about the anxiety, like having your own that's coming from. So this is the little test that I want you to do. If you can use your camera to scan this QR code, and in your package, there's this 2-minute quiz. Why don't you get that pulled up? Sorry. So where did it go?
It says it starts in 14 minutes.
So they'll start in 14 minutes. Is it around that? Okay, so I don't know how to fix that, but still. I want you to take this test, and then we probably just come back with the results and have it later at the end. So it's a 2-minute test that's in your package. It should look like this, and this is basically the 10 areas of ACEs that you may experience. And so at the end, I'll have you come back to this test, and we'll see that like the impact not only just on your kids, but the impact will come on you, and seeing what it even looks like on this other. So if you can see, it looks like this.
We take the quiz right on here.
Yeah, you can take it on here. You don't have to like mark it if you're not comfortable, but you can just go through them and count the ones that you experience if you don't feel comfortable having it on paper. So you just want to count the number and then make a note in your mind, okay, this is how many, because that's what the test is going to be, how many cases.
This is for me.
Yes, for you personally.
Currently or in the past?
So ACEs are actually childhood experience, everything that you experienced before 18. So any experience that you experienced before. And you don't have to give out the answer. The test is going to be anonymous. Can't say it, but you know what I'm trying to say. And so you just keep that in mind. And once it's ready, which is weird, I had it in my book, we'll come back and take it.
That says 10 a.m. on it.
Maybe it was the time thing that made it the time.
Oh, yeah, it says UTC.
Oh, mine said an hour. That's so weird. Okay, I'll try to fix it. Maybe not fix it, it's okay. So going to the impact of trauma on generations. So going back to understanding your past so that we can build our present. So I love this quote because it says, if you don't know your history, then you don't know anything. You are a leaf that doesn't know it is a part of a tree. So I like this because understanding your history helps give you perspective on how to heal your present. You're not just a leaf, your kid is not just a leaf being tossed and turned by the wind, but they are a leaf that is part of a bigger system with deep roots, and understanding the roots is the beginning of understanding how to build the future. And I have so many parents coming in like, help me fix my kid, like fix them, what's wrong with them? I don't know what to do. And they see their kids as this leaf, this blowing, tossed in the wind, and not seeing them as a part of this big system that comes from deep roots. And so we'll talk about like generational trauma and how the trauma, not only that they're experiencing, but Kara, a lot of the points that Kara hit on today, they're not only experiencing that, but they're experiencing trauma that's been inherited through your family, that's been inherited through your genetics. And so we're going to talk about that. So this thing, now it says 10 minutes, what we got. So epigenetics, what is epigenetics? Let me get my slide. So in short, let me just explain. So epigenetics is basically the theory that generational trauma was developed that from generational trauma being the theory that trauma can be inherited because there are genetic changes in a person's DNA. The changes don't damage the genes, instead it alters how it functions, which lead a genetic marker, and this is called epigenetics. So in short, I love this picture because it's very simple. So if your mother, so your parents had trauma, and they were pregnant with you, and they had unhealed or unprocessed trauma, and they were pregnant with you, and they never dealt with their trauma, then that leaves a genetic marker on your genes, which then influence your kids. So it influenced, because when she's pregnant, she's going through generations. So it impacts those generations. And so, sorry about that. This next one, I that's it. So in short, that's kind of like the simple way to understand it. And we understand this idea with twins. So we know if you are a twin, there's a disposition that you may have twins when you have kids. We also are very familiar with this with alcoholism. So we know that you have a parent that is an alcoholic. If you are a child of alcoholic, we know that you have a predisposition for addictive behaviors. And so it's the same with trauma that we're realizing that if your parents have trauma and they never dealt with it, then you also have a thank you. I'm like, oh my goodness. Thank you. Predisposition from trauma as well, and so which creates mental illness. So these are 3 examples of what that looks like across 3 different cultures. So let's say Jane, great-grandparents, are survivors of the European War, which of course during that time created PTSD, which led to alcoholism as a way to cope. Alcoholism leads to horrific behavior like sexual abuse. Sexual abuse leads to emotional damage coming from what happens in this house stays in this house. So that gives Jane trauma. And then Ashanti's great-grandparents are survivors of slavery and racial violence in the American South. That leads to the abandonment with men being pulled out of homes, being imprisoned, which leads to domestic violence, which leads to low self-esteem, which leads to complex PTSD for Ashanti. And then Ashok, great-grandparents, are survivors of the famine and oppression in British India. And so they become very conscious of poverty conscious, which leads to you need to have this job, you need to do this, you need to do good in school, which leads to this self-educated shame if there's this dishonoring of your family versus valuing, honoring your family versus shaming your family, which of course leads to severe anxiety to live up to that pressure to make sure that your family is not in poverty, which leads to depression. So when you work through your trauma, you choose not to pass it on to the next generation. And so I love these examples because it also shows, again, kids aren't just dealing with their own traumatic experience that they are experiencing just in the last 2 years from the pandemic, from being pulled out of school for 2 years or a year, however long some different schools did different things, experiencing bullying, what Kara talked about, trying to figure out who they are in this culture where there's no absolute, everything is up for interpretation. Like, it's just disrupted with racial violence, wars, like literally so much at one time, and then having to deal with the stuff that was already inherited with them. So understanding them as a tree, like a leaf, a part of such a big system, not only just your family, but also the world. So when there is trauma, generational trauma, it usually leads to dysfunction in families. And so when there's trauma, also these handouts are, I forgot to say, it's also in your package as well. So you can add it for later too. So when there's trauma in the family, it leads to dysfunction in the family. And so different members of the family take up roles in order to help the family function. So this is important not only just for your teams, but also for yourself to figure out if there is generational trauma in your family, what role that you take on in order to make your family function better. And if there's trauma in your family, this can be helpful in identifying what role is your child taking on to help your family function better. So I'm not going to go over all eight, but I'll kind of hit on 4. So there's the hero, the shining star of the family. They're very high functioning, they're well balanced, they're individual that the parent can point to and say, see, our family's not that bad, we got this shining star. They're doing good, they came from us. So kind of like pointing to them to have this facade of that their family is doing well. And then you have the scapegoat. You may feel this like, I'm the black sheep of the family, feeling like your experience, basically your experience of hardships, while others are often regarded as well-behaved. And so you become the black sheep because there is dysfunction in your family, and instead of acting like there aren't, your behavior shows that there's some dysfunction. So it comes out as behavior problem, but what it's really saying, my family is not working right. And then there's the rescuer. This is kind of my role. The rescuer in the family is the fixer. So they look needs to get met. If I can make my siblings get along, then I will have peace. So you look for problems to fix in order to get your need met. So, and you develop that belief, if I am needed and wanted, loving, if I'm needed, then I'm wanted, and that's how I feel loved. And then the other one I would want to look at was the mascot. So the mascot is basically the comedian. I think most comedians probably was the mascot and their family. So they take on this, let me be goofy when the room is tense, let me make a joke to make the room lighter, let me keep the family like laughing to like ease the pain of the family. But they are also using that as a mask to hide their suffering and how they're being impacted by the family dysfunction. So being able, again, to identify not only your role is important, that if there was trauma in your family, generational trauma, because then whatever role you took on as to help your family function, it usually play out in all your other relationships, like parenting, your marriage, it plays out in your friendships, so it's very, in even your job as well. So it's really helpful understanding, because then you can learn to like, okay, what is the opposite of this, so that I can have more healthy relationships. So I thought this was funny because everybody knows The Simpsons is such a dysfunctional family. I'm not going to go into their dysfunction, but I just thought it was funny because like, if you've seen the show, you know how dysfunctional it is, but just that pattern of generational trauma. So next time you watch it, if you watch it, try to figure out what roles they took on. So, trauma impact on the body. So I really love explaining this. It's like the geek in me. It's because sometimes when we think about mental illness, we think that it's just in the mind, of just making it up. Part is that true, but they're not making it up. But part of it is in the mind. It's a chemical imbalance that's happening in the mind. It's not made up. And so even if trauma is from generation, or if it's external, kind of what Kara was talking about, even if it's external or internal, it still affect your chemical balance. And so we see this example with women when we get pregnant. We're understanding that our hormones go out of whack, and so how we are treated is way more acceptable and understanding, because we know that this is a time where your chemicals you're creating life. And so your chemicals are not going to be normal because it's being influenced by literally creating beautiful life. And so it's the same when we experience internal or external trauma. Our hormones are basically impacted and it's out of whack. And so understanding that, and we'll talk about a little bit why that's where medication comes in, because it don't solve your problems, but it gives you the ability to be at a functional and balancing out this chemical imbalance in you, so that you can be able to be at a place where you can deal with it. So it basically puts you at a normal level where everyone else is, not everywhere, a typical level, so that your kid or maybe you can actually deal with the problems in your life. So, going back to that, so emotions are basically forms of chemistry and energy. So, it's ready. Okay, I'll come back to it. Well, let's go to it now before we go. If you want to go back to the test and take it, since the 10 minutes have passed. I did a vote, so ignore my vote. So you just go and take that test. If you still remember your number, you're just going to go and vote and plug in that number, and we're going to see the results. Yeah, you just want to put the number of how many ACEs, how many average childhood experiences that you had. So if you had 1, you'll just put 1. If you had 10, you'll put 10. And we'll see the results as it comes up. So once you take that, just let me know. And it's a number. Oh, it's okay. People are still taking it. We'll see as it goes up.
So how do you get into where
You just go to this code. You use your camera to pull up that code, and it should take you to the link. It should take you directly to the place to go, and then you just click the one that is for you. Okay. So this is the result. We have 30, you're still voting.
Yeah, we're still voting.
Okay.
Only thing is I just see the results.
Oh, you'll see the results up here on the screen.
You won't vote.
So, as you can see, that even in this room, you have people that has also been through some similar things that you've been through. And so, just say you've never dealt with this trauma, going back to what we talk about with epigenetics, that gets passed down. So, 33% only had 2, 33% had 4, 3 to 4. 13% of you have had 5 to 6, 7 to 8. 6% of you have had 7 to 8, and 13% of you has had 9 to 10, which is a lot of trauma. And so I think seeing this and seeing that this actually does impact you, but also your kids. So understanding that it's not only important for you to get them support, but it's also important that you get yourself support. So you're healing to protect the future. So let's go back to emotions. So these are the chemicals that are responsible for, but that are responsible for happiness. So we have dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins. So dopamine gives us motivation, it helps us with learning, it gives us the ability to enjoy pleasure, have fun, reward, it gives us determination to accomplish our goals, desires, and needs. And then we have oxytocin, which is basically the love chemical, but it allows us to feel trust, it motivates to build and sustain relationships, and again, it's known as the cuddle or love drug, and it plays a big role in bonding. And then we have serotonin, which helps us feel important and significant in our relationships. It gives us confidence, basically. It helps us be calm, and be able to accept ourselves, but be calm in social environments. And then we have endorphins. Endorphins relieve a grief before to mask pain, physical pain. And it responds to pain and stress that alleviates anxiety and depression. And we'll talk about that one and its relation to self-harming later. So when you think about with chemicals, like if there's a deficiency or a surplus or a deficiency and not a balance, that's when it causes mental illness. So this is what the deficiency in these hormones look like. It doesn't really talk about the surplus, but the surplus can look like hallucinations, psychosis, and stuff like that. But the deficiency looks like for dopamine, like when you aren't producing enough dopamine, you can look procrastination, low self-esteem, low energy, fatigue, feeling anxious, mood swings. With oxytocin, you can feel lonely. With lack of oxytocin, you can feel lonely, stress, disconnected in relationships, and have insomnia. And then when there's a decrease in serotonin, you can also have low self-esteem, be overly sensitive, have anxiety or panic attacks, mood swings, feel hopeless, social phobias, have obsessive or compulsive behavior thoughts, and also insomnia. And then with endorphins, you can also have anxiety, aches and pain, and impulsive behavior. And so typically when kids are self-harming, this is what is happening, it's releasing endorphins. And so that's why they go to it as a relief from pain, because it's taking their emotional pain and making it physical to give them relief from the emotional pain that they're feeling. So they're not seeking attention. They're not just doing this so that you can, well, it could be, they also need more attention, which is fair. I know some parents they're just paying attention, me seeking attention. That means there's a lack of attention being given, if that's true. So that is a telltale sign, like how can I give my kid more attention so they're not going to these unhealthy coping skills to be able to help them process that. So healing through connection. It literally does take a village. I don't think we're meant to be raised just in these isolated parent pods. I think God created us to be able to be raised in community. And so we're going to talk about the importance of that. So connecting emotionally. So connecting emotionally, what it takes to connect emotionally. Compassion. A short definition of compassion is to suffer together. Knowing that if your kid is suffering, your family is suffering. And until we can help that your kid get better, then it's going to affect the family. And you know how that scripture is like, if one part of the body is hurting, then the whole part of the body is hurting. And that's the same in family, small family dynamics. And so it also takes patience. And so patience is the capacity to accept or tolerate delay, trouble, or suffering without getting angry or upset. So the example I like to use is a patient with cancer. You won't be like, you just need to get better. You won't be like, just get over it. You won't be like, you're taking too long to get better. You understand that this is a process. You understand that it's going to take time to heal. You understand that this person is not going to be able to do things like they used to do. It's going to impact their ability to function and how they live and how they move. And so you're going to have so much more grace and compassion, but you're also going to hold that person accountable to getting well. Are you taking your meds? Are you eating? Are you like making sure that they are taking their steps of taking care of their basic needs? And so I like this, not that mental health is cancer, not trying to say those things are the same, but just to give an example of like your posture towards someone that is physically ill towards your posture towards your kid that is mentally ill. Because sometimes it can be hard to have that patient when you're like, your life has just affected me so much, get it together. Like, I cannot handle this, which totally understandable. And so there's a difference between sympathy and empathy. Sympathy involves seeing things from your own perspective. Well, when I was a kid, I went through that, so I understand what you're going through. Or, yeah, that's like, I work every day, and so I get how stressed you are. So basically coming from this perspective that you know exactly what they're feeling when you don't. You grew up in a very different culture. You grew up with a very different set of beliefs, world issues, so you don't really understand what they're going through. And to say that you do is insulting. And so understanding that, try not to use that language of, I get it, but like, help me get it. And that's the difference with empathy. Empathy involves putting yourself in the other person's shoes and understanding why they may have these particular feelings. So one of my friends, her daughter is at the age where she always asks why. Why, mommy, why? So she gets annoyed because then she like has to ask like why, and so the kid, she'll be like, well, because of this, and she's like, why? Because of this. And so you kind of want to take that same approach with your kids, not asking why, but like this, let me explore, let me get deeper and deeper and deeper until I really feel like I get where you're coming from. Kind of what Carrie was saying earlier, you want, like if they're giving you a bone, dig, like try to figure out, oh wow, and show empathy. Wow, that must have been really hard. Oh, that must have been really embarrassed. Like, oh, I can imagine like, you know, having to do that presentation after coming back from the pandemic. What was that like for you? So coming from this place of, man, like I want to feel what you feel so I can get what you get, so I can be able to help you in whatever way you need to help. So, I'm gonna kind of like brush through this. None. Okay, I'll rush this. Sorry, I wasn't paying attention. So attunement, these are some skills, attachment skills that you can use. Attunement, which is noticing changes in their expression and key words, being present, not being distracted by your own life and problems. Responsiveness, showing empathy, curiosity, mirroring, affirmation, concerns, engagement, genuinely wanting to understand, listening to understand, not to respond, regulating yourself, so being grounded yourself and not allowing yourself to get upset or easily angered, mirroring calmness, so if they're upset, you gotta remain calm. And then handling their negative emotions, being able to handle when they're dissatisfied, mad at you or hurt by you, and being willing to repair, being willing to apologize when you make a mistake or when you don't understand, knowing that we're not always going to get it right. It's not about being a perfect parent, but it's about being a home parent. And then connecting to community, making sure that they're connected to a therapist, making sure that they're connected to a psychiatrist, even if you don't believe in medication, just going to talk to someone to see if it would be a good option, having a mentor, like Kara mentioned, connecting to community activities like sports, art program, theater, connecting to the school system, which Haley would kind of talk about a little bit more, connecting to information and training workshops like these, come out to these when we have them, or connecting to online or in-person support groups with parents that are going through similar things, so that you can have a community of yourself, a support group to let out the negative feelings that you may be feeling by having to be a parent of a kid suffering from mental illness. So thank you, that's all I have.
Quite a bit, which I think is encouraging. We've done this before, and although we have a lot of people with different specialties and experience and backgrounds, hopefully what you're going to come away with is that there is a lot of overlap. You're going to be hearing a lot of the same things reinforced. I don't know about you, but that's helpful for me. If I get too much sort of separate stuff, it's like, how does this all connect? But you're hearing a lot of the same themes. And ultimately, what I'm here to talk about is how all of this connects in terms of our mind, our body, our feelings, our spirit, all of this interplay. So all of us, and so just also real quick, I probably won't take all 20 minutes, and it's going to be a little bit different than the first two, because I have a lot less information, which the information is great. I'm going to be kind of slowing us down and having us do a little bit more reflecting and thinking and not as much informational. But this is a really interesting thing. All of us got here today, physically, to be present, because there was this incredible interplay between different parts of the body that allowed us to stand up, start walking, stop, get in our car, drive, walk through certain doors, go up steps to arrive here at this moment. And it is called the vestibulo-ocular reflex. This is amazing to me. Another big word. Sound really professional there, don't I? Vestibulo-ocular reflex. It's one of the fastest and most active reflexes in the human body. It uses head movements detected by the inner ear to generate compensatory eye movements that are equal but opposite in direction to head motion. This subconscious ongoing adjustment of eye positions results in a stable visual field despite significant movement of the head. So what is that saying? So our inner ear is reading what our eyes are seeing, and it's got this idea, so if we're walking or if we're running, so this is what's happening, and so it encourages the eye to do the exact opposite, so that we don't get all dizzy and unbalanced. Stuff we take for granted that we don't even think about. Our ears, which I think it's interesting because the theme of what I'm going to talk about this morning is about learning how to listen to ourselves and teaching our teens how they can learn to listen to themselves. But it's something that we never think about, this incredible, quick reflex and this interplay of different body parts, until we're out of balance, until our world starts spinning. And so I'm going to show this really, very complicated, intense little thing here. See it pop up?
Yep.
There it is. Some of it. Done the bat spin before, right? So it's now there's a video playing. So I show that sort of humorous example, right? There's a lot of laughter in the background. It's really goofy. It's fun to watch people doing this. What is the bat in this metaphor? If we're thinking about our own lives and thinking about helping teens, so we can obviously see that those people were out of balance. And so what's the bat represent?
It's the only stable item.
Okay, it was the only stable item. What else could it represent, you think?
Our minds.
Our minds? Yeah? I think it's, Miles,
The trials in life?
the trials in life, I just think it's our lives, right? And so this thing that helps us get and move forward and get to where we want to go is great when it's working properly. But if we're honest, our lives can really represent the bat spin game, where we're running around and we're thinking and feeling and doing so many things that our emotions, our feelings, our physical bodies get out of balance. And so a big part of what I want to get us to think about today is how do we want to acknowledge that that is fun for a field day, but it's not really how we're supposed to live our lives. And even with really good intentions, I really appreciate Kara sharing how many of us have parents that are like, let's get our kids involved in activities. And it's those very activities that make them super anxious and stressed. Certainly that's not our goal, but we know that's part of life, learning how to do that. But it's learning to say, we're spinning really fast here. We're having a tough time arriving where we want to go, emotionally, physically, and our feelings and our thoughts. How do we stop the world from spinning? It takes a very intentional, regular decision. And I know for Erica and I, we had 3 teenagers right across the parking lot. Olivia graduated in 2018, Anna in 2020, and Grant in 2021. And I know Olivia in particular was this very type A, very high performing, always she was doing cross country and tons of academics, she was in musicals, all these different things, and we had to say, girlfriend, you are spinning. All these swirling emotions, and so part of our role was helping her acknowledge just being involved, just being busy, just doing, it's affecting you physically, it's affecting you academically, you're really snappy and short, so let's figure that out, all that. But the key part of this is for us to be able to help our teens. I think as adults, it really takes discipline for us to pause to say, as they look at our lives, are they seeing the bat spin game? Are they seeing us running around, trying to do a bunch of stuff, and we're snippy with each other, we've got headaches all the time, we're not sleeping great, and so we're sort of saying, hey, be calm, look at life in a balanced kind of way. And I'm like, I'm not seeing that in you. So a big part of this is like, how many of us have traveled on an airplane and we hear the stewardess say, in the event of sudden turbulence, the mask will drop from the overhead compartment. And what do they encourage us to do? Put our masks on first. And so some of it in the next 10 minutes here, what I'm going to get us to think about, this skill of listening. It was really interesting because I knew that's really what this whole balance of our lives, it really does come down to listening. And it's interesting that this example of how we keep balanced physically starts in the ear.
Wow.
So I think it's a skill, it's a decision. A lot of what we've already heard this morning, there's so much that's coming in. So it's selective listening. What am I going to tune into today? And if I'm ignoring what I'm feeling and thinking and feeling physically, that's not going to go well in the long term. So teaching our teens, likewise, this incredible life skill to know that it's good to pause. For Olivia, it was like a really powerful thing to say, you gotta say no. It's okay not to actually do anything. I think there's a bunch of us, even when we chill and relax, we're still doing stuff. I think it's extremely difficult to be literally in a quiet space. Even for some of us in a faith community, a quiet time, it's not very quiet. We're praying, we're reading, we're doing something, whatever, and a lot of people can do that. So what I want to look at and have us to be thinking about, because again, as has already been shared, if we don't learn how to pause, so like when we go into the doctor and they're like, let's evaluate this, ooh, we need to address this. If we're not learning how to do that and teaching our teens to say, something's off here emotionally, something's off with what I'm thinking and feeling, or it's not where I want to be, learning how to pause and say, I gotta make time to go see the doctor. That's a good thing. Like, this is where I can't chew on this side of my mouth. Ding, 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 ding. Too often, we just keep going through, or they learn to just kind of keep pushing through, because I gotta get this report in, gotta show up to soccer, gotta go to church, gotta go do whatever, and they don't make the time to go see the dentist. And so this is a really, it's a discipline, it's a decision that we do to really slow down and listen to ourselves. But again, has been shared, the interplay and how if we're doing well, our emotions can really help our thought life. And if our thoughts are in a good place, it really can impact us physically in a great way. The opposite is there as well. So learning how to listen, again, one study, which is pretty profound, not a huge sample size, but in terms of the span, at Harvard study, they looked at 270 sophomores for 80 years. And over the years, the researchers studied their health trajectories, their broader lives, including their triumphs, failures in careers and marriage, and findings produced a profound thing. There was all sorts of physical considerations and environment. The number one most consistent thing was the health of their relationships that affected them physically. So I think science and doctors are learning that it isn't just about let's test the blood and let's look at this hormone. It is these, what are your relationships like? How safe do you feel at home? It is this exchange of information that happens between all of these three different things. So part of this, again, is if the key is listening, we've got to tune in and ask ourselves, what does that listening look like? So again, it's things that we should be practicing for ourselves so that then we can mirror, but then we can also help our teens learn to do this as well. So it's this idea of slowing down, and for everybody that's going to look different, that's going to have a different kind of vibe. For some people, going outside is wonderful. I love being out in nature. I actually love when it gets really cold, because I go to the same parks and no one else is there. So that's kind of nice. Sometimes I go to parks and it's really sunny. I'm like, what's everybody doing here? This is my park. Some people, not so much. You go outside, it's like bugs, wind, mud. It's more distracting. So there's all different decisions that you need to make to figure out how do you create an environment where your teen can find quiet space. And so it isn't just asking sort of the simple questions, again, as we've heard already, but it's asking a lot of whys. Okay, so I'm going to use an example from my own life. So if we're thinking about the physical, the emotional, the mental, the spiritual, and the interplay, it's also important to identify how our teens are oriented and their inclinations. So some of our teens are more naturally intellectually inclined. They're very tuned into what they're thinking, but not so much in terms of how that's affecting their emotions. And some of them are very in touch with their emotions. Some are very physically oriented. So for me, turning 55 next week, physically, is that a wow? Like, wow, you're really old? Wow thing. All right, thanks, Erica. I was encouraging you when I got up here with you. I'm still up here a little longer, you know. So I'm going to disagree with that slide that Erica got up here. Okay. So my inclination, and has been for years, if I'm discouraged and if I have a lot of intense stuff that I'm thinking about, because I tend to overthink, or if I'm feeling a lot of emotions. I grew up in a family that never talked about intense things. Whenever we did, my dad would like change the subject. It was always like sort of maintaining the peace. So I internalized that. So when I would be feeling super intense stuff, my thought was, let me go cut the grass, let me go to the gym, let me run. And that's good but dangerous because it appears to be healthy, but I would return from those physical activities not having listened to my emotions or thoughts, and now just really physically tired, so actually in a worse place. I'm still feeling stuff, I'm still thinking stuff, but now I'm really tired, and my family would kind of bear the brunt of me not pausing to say. So I did an event last July that required for me to be on a bike path for 5 to 6 hours at a time on a Saturday. That event in and of itself caused a lot of anxiety and a lot of stress. My earbuds wouldn't last that long, so because I would listen to music to try to kind of distract myself, and so I found myself on a bike for 3 hours learning, sounds crazy, for as many activities and events that I've done, to sort of pause to say, okay, what are you feeling right now? I'm really tired. I've been on a bike for 2.5 hours. Okay, that makes sense. What else are you feeling? I don't want to get off this bike and then have to run because I was doing the triathlon. Okay, that makes sense. Most people wouldn't want to get off a bike after a long run or ride and run. What else are you feeling? I know it sounds really, really corny. You're thirsty, you're bored, you're lonely. And then it allowed me to think, I'm discouraged at work. And then it started off physically. What are you feeling physically? And really asking the why and acknowledging it. So part of what I really want to emphasize is and in the handout, you're going to see that I included some reflective listening, some active listening exercises. And we all know, but we can look at those really quickly. I brought my phone up here to start the timer, so just give me a little hit nod or something when I'm done. So what started off as physically kind of getting in touch with where I was, it would then move into what I was thinking emotionally, what I was thinking, feeling. And now I'm finding that really, really helpful. Yeah, it's on the page that has the part that you can't read at the top because it's in color, so next time I'll do black and white. Now I'll be at my desk, I'm a technical writer, and I work with these teams across the country, and these projects are big, and I'm starting to, and it'll be like, what are you feeling right now? Why are you feeling it? Why are you thinking that when you turn this in, they're not going to like it? And so it's this slowing down in the moment and processing. So likewise for our teens, this is the difficult part, is because even as adults, we're not always super reflective. We don't always know what we're feeling or what we're thinking, and that's okay, but learning how to pause to ask those questions and being able to say, I don't know why I'm feeling this. I need to create some space where I can think about it some more. Our teenagers aren't always wanting to talk, period, right? 2, they definitely don't want to talk to us. Not always. So we've got to create those spaces. I know at different points with my youngest, Grant, I'd be wanting to spend some one-on-one time with him, and I'd be like, hey, let's go grab, donut and coffee or something. And his question would be like, am I in trouble? So our intentions would be like, I want to connect. And then they're like, oh boy. The other thing I intended to do was to sort of teach. And it's like, okay, is there like an hour-long lesson coming? And I'm like, no, man, I just want to hang out. So sometimes we have to be very aware of what we've conditioned them to expect when we say, do you want to talk? Because if they're like, if it was like last time, not really. Because it wasn't really a talk. It was more like a lecture, or it was more whatever. And so having them learn how to pause within their own context, within their own lives, knowing not to over-busy our kids and knowing this is a skill that you'll take into adulthood. But being able to pause, to listen, to ask those follow-ups. If you look here on the sheet, again, this idea of active listening, there's a lot in there that, again, that we can do for ourselves. And as we get better listeners, it begins to affect us physically, emotionally, intellectually in very, very positive ways. But carving out that alone time, that in and of itself, if we're really honest, is one of the most difficult things about this whole process. Is simply not having anything to do. Or learning in the moment as they're driving to gymnastics, or if they're on the way out wherever, like we're not actually going to have music on right now. And again, I know for me that's my first instinct, like Google, play something, because I just want sounds going. I kind of want to escape from what I've been thinking about all day. So teaching them, I actually inherited a car from my parents that the radio didn't work. And I was actually kind of bummed, and then I called and I was like, that's really old, it'll only be $2,000. I'm like, guess I'm not having a radio in that car. But when I drive in that car, what does it allow me to do? Just think, just be. So really carving out time, helping them carve out time, helping them see the value of it. And you've heard it before from Kara and Erica, where they're seeing you do it. Mom, I thought you were gonna go to the store. I need to go shopping. What I really need to do is just go sit down on the back porch and just be for a little bit. So again, if they're not seeing us do it, it's kind of hard to call them to do it. So this idea of learning how to pause and paraphrasing, teaching them by how we do it as well. So like, what are you thinking? What are you feeling? What are you feeling physically? And not just, I have a headache, or why? What else has been going on in your life? When I get stressed, I realize I actually my breathing gets super shallow. And I have to be like, So just even that process for me, kind of taking me in and knowing where I'm at that moment. So asking those feelings, again, acknowledging. You won't have to have an answer right now, but just acknowledging that you're scared is huge. Acknowledging that you're angry, big. We're not going to fix it right now, don't have a lot of deep answers, but that's really helpful. As we've heard again, trying to ask those follow-up questions, showing empathy. We can do that again by sometimes sharing our own struggles. I had a really tough time at work this week. It really helped when I went out and just took a walk and I was able to kind of process things. So mirroring those exercises, helping them ask those questions and say, you know what? You don't know right now. Keep thinking about it, keep processing it, and that'll help you in time to get a little bit more. It's so easy to want to kick in, like, well, you shouldn't be thinking that, and sometimes we even think it's well-meaning, like, oh, I think I'm ugly, or I think I'm overweight, or I think I'm dumb. Well, you're not, and you should, and there's a quick desire to fix. There's a quick desire to correct. And again, what I acknowledged when I was out training for that thing is that nothing about my immediate situation is going to change. There isn't anybody that's going to come pick me up. I still have to be out here for it, and that's like school. You can acknowledge that, like, well, you're a sophomore. You've got a lot more years left, so we've got to figure this out. I can't change your environment. I can't take away these stressors. But encouraging that process of slowing people down, slowing our teens down, slowing our lives down, encouraging them to do the same has massive, massive benefits. So as we kind of wrap it up here, other things for you to be thinking about is to explore what's helpful for you, for your teens, to get and create those quiet spaces where that reflection can happen, where that acknowledgement can happen, and then you move in a direction of how do I take care of this feeling, this thought, this physical issue. Breathing, meditation, physical, diet, relationships. Again, very often you won't be the person that helps your teen begin to process this. It may be a mentor, it may be a counselor, a psychiatrist, a dietitian, a trainer, a pastor. It's a whole range, but our role is to kind of help them and facilitate those relationships to be able to ask those questions. I know personally for me going through therapy, my counselor would say, okay, so you're shooting for this goal. Who came up with that goal? Well, I did. Is your family not going to love you if you don't hit that goal? No, I don't even think they know what it is or if they care. And it sounds really goofy, but him just asking me those questions. You know, you can change the goal. You know that you wouldn't have to do this event, and the world's going to keep spinning. Really? Are you sure? Right. So just those questions to help me pause, to help me think. Evaluating your diet, evaluating the amount of physical. Very often when we're really tired, what we need is physical activity. That can be some of the most rejuvenating, refreshing. But again, we got to be careful because we don't want to turn it into a chore. You had a really stressful day, let's go for a walk. Like, go away from me, bad person, right? You know, we just got to figure out the timing of it all as well. So the key is, again, knowing that our body was designed, the inner ear, our eyes, our brain, to get us moving forward in the direction that we want to go. Likewise, we've been designed with emotions, thoughts, a body, and it's been designed to work together well. We've just got to be careful that our lives don't resemble the bat spin game, that we know how to slow down, that we know how to pause, so that we can get back the balance. Life is not about how fast you get there, it's about enjoying the journey and helping our teams to do the same. Any quick questions as I wrap up? Thank you.
So, little rusty, so bear with me. But I will be talking about special needs and specifically autism. So who am I? My name is Haley Hammond. I went to UC, University of Cincinnati, for both my undergraduate and my master's. My undergrad was in psychology, minor in criminal justice, and then my master's was in behavior analysis. I'm currently a clinic manager at a behavioral center in Cincinnati. I work with children ages 2 to 22 years old diagnosed with autism and other developmental disabilities. What exactly do? I collect, analyze, and graph data. I create treatment plans, write IEPs and ETRs, and I run various assessments. Most of the children in my center, they engage in maladaptive behaviors such as aggression, prompted instruction, and various self-interest behaviors. While some are completely vocal, others require augmentative devices. I also have some kiddos on my caseload who just fly through their programs weekly, and I'm constantly updating their stuff. So it's just such a wide range of the type of kids I work with. I got married in 2020 to this guy right here. We had a small COVID wedding, and I'm a proud dog mom. It's got a rocky road and Harley Quinn. So what is ASD? So autism spectrum disorder is a developmental disability caused by differences in the brain. Autism can look different across each individual. The amount of support needed ranges, hence the spectrum. Individuals with ASD have difficulties with social communication, interactions, and restrictive or repetitive behaviors. An autism diagnosis can be done by a professional as young as 2 years old. So what can ASD look like? So deficits in social communication and interaction skills. So this can be avoidant eye contact, unresponsive to their own name, lack of facial expressions, little interest in social engagement with others, minimal use of social gestures, so waving hello or goodbye. They don't hit the typical milestones of other neurotypical peers at the same rate. And they just may need additional support, accommodations, and or time to learn these skills. Restrictive or repetitive behaviors or interests. So this can look up lining up objects, repeating words or phrases over and over, flapping their hands, body rocking, walking or pacing on their toes, spinning themselves. They can get upset with minor changes in their schedule or routine, can have obsessive interests, sensitivities to various sounds, smells, tastes, looks, or feels. So yeah, I've worked with a whole bunch of kids who have just different things like this. With the obsessive interest, I've had kids who love SpongeBob SquarePants, and that's all they'll watch over and over again. I had a 3-year-old who loved Moana, and I got sick and tired of watching Moana every day, but that's what we did, because that's what he loved. So it's just so funny to see like what their interests are, and it changes quickly, and sometimes it doesn't, so it's fun. But after a diagnosis, the emotional impact on the parents. So this can include sadness and grief, fear and worries, stress, including financial stress, and then anger and frustration. Many parents begin to feel this after they get a positive diagnosis. With grief, the parents grieve the dreams and potential plans they had for their child. A parent might have fear and worry that their child might not live a full and happy life, that they won't make friends, or they won't be able to experience the same opportunities that others have. These are all very valid feelings. So treatments for ASD, these can include behavioral treatments such as ABA, developmental treatments such as occupational therapy and speech therapy, educational, so taught within the classroom setting, social relational, so focuses on improving social and emotional skills, pharmacological, so medication. There are no medications that treat or cure autism, but there are medications that aid in other conditions that may correspond with it, such as anxiety or depression, SIB, which is self-interest behaviors, inability to focus, high energy levels, and then psychological, so working with a psychologist or therapist. So I will be mainly talking about the behavioral therapy. So what is ABA? ABA is an evidence-based science that focuses on the treatment of socially significant behaviors. Progress on goals is tracked and measured. The goal is to increase problem behaviors, increase language and communication skills, improve attention, social and academic skills. This can be one-on-one or in a group setting, can be provided in the home, school, or community, and prioritizes the use of reinforcement and least restrictive practices. So with emotionally significant behaviors, these are behaviors that will improve their life. So there may be parents who are like, I want my kid to know all the capitals of the United States. That's great, that's a fun and cool skill to have, but is that really going to improve their life in the long run? So we really want to make sure we're at least focusing first on their social skills, on those communication skills, things that are going to increase their livelihood in the long run. Working on various communication goals, social skills, providing eye contact, reading others, life skills, how to clean, daily chores, washing your hands, potty training. These are all items I've worked on with various kiddos at the center. How to get individualized care. So talk with your primary care provider, get a diagnosis, talk with the school district to schedule an evaluation team report, so DTR meeting, and an individualized education program or an IEP meeting. Look into various accommodations that the school may provide for students with special needs. So I'll talk a little bit about the difference between an ETR and an IEP. So the ETR comes first before the IEP. So the school or center will evaluate the student's needs for special education services. An ETR is created, which is basically a summary of the evaluations, and a meeting is scheduled to determine if the child qualifies for services. If the student does qualify, an IEP is created. An ETR expires every 3 years, but it can be revised as needed. So once you get the go on the ETR, you have an IEP meeting. An IEP is designed to meet the unique needs of the individual. It highlights the student's current strengths, needs, goals, and services, and it expires every year. So transitioning into adulthood. So we develop a transition plan with the school district and other team members. This can include the BCBA, the SLP, the child's OT, doctor, parents, whatever. And what will the child's adult life include? So this can include post-secondary education, such as college, employment, housing and residential support. So this can be funded by public and private sources. Support supervising group home living, and various care facilities. Under the Individuals with Disability Education Act, or IDEA, a child with disabilities can receive special education services through 21 years old. So like I said, my center, we take kids up until they're 22 years old, if that's what their parent wants. Or the child can continue living at home with their parents. As far as employment goes, some organizations and businesses will hire individuals with disabilities to work a few days or a few hours a week. These jobs can include being a cashier at a restaurant, a bagger or shelf stocker at a grocery store. One of the students I work with, he got a job working for a mechanic over the summer, and when we came back to school mid-July, he would tell me all about it. He's like, I got a summer job, Miss Healy, and I worked with a mechanic, and he was so excited about it. It was so fun just to hear about his experience, and he was so proud about it, and I was very proud for him. As I said before, the center I work with, yes, I said that already. But yes, we will begin working on various vocation skills around 12 and 14 years old, so that can include just like job skills and getting ready for stuff like that, if they're able to. And then right as they're approaching their 18th birthday, we'll start working on transition goals for the kiddo. So how to support? So if you're a parent, be their biggest advocate. Ask a lot of questions, be inclusive, implement what your child is learning at school into the home environment, help to educate those around you about your child's diagnosis and what their needs are. Be patient and know that you're a rock star. So from my experience, it's hard for parents to see very many significant changes at home that we're seeing at the center. So it is important to kind of generalize those skills into the school environment or center environment into a home environment. With being inclusive, just bring the kid along with you for different family outings and functions. One of the kids on my caseload, my director came in and she's like, he's not going to be here Thursday, Friday, and then Monday and Tuesday this coming week. And I was like, oh no, what happened? And she's like, no, Dad just wants to take him to Disney. And I was like, oh, awesome, like, that's amazing. So definitely like include them, if able. And yeah, I know he's gonna have a blast. And then be patient. For a lot of kiddos with disability, it may take them longer to learn skills, to keep working on it with them. One of my kiddos a few years ago, he was 3 or 4 years old at the time, and we were working for months on just a simple like ring stacker. And he required a lot of prompting for me just to do it. And then there was just one day he just did it completely independently, and I just started crying. I was like, "He did it!" So stuff that may seem so simple, it may just take them a longer time, but when they do it, celebrate those victories. It's just so awesome watching these kids learn new things or build new skills, and it's probably one of my favorite things about my job. But yeah, so how to support if you are a family member or a friend. Offer support with your actions. So how can I help? What do you need? Be a listening ear. Be inclusive and engage with your child with the diagnosis. Do your own research and learn about the diagnosis. So when I have meetings with parents, sometimes it's just very obvious that they just need someone to listen to them and vent about different daily struggles or frustrations. So be that person because yeah, sometimes we just need someone to listen to us, as we've said before, just active listening. So that is it on me.
Good job, Haley.
Like Haley, I do not like to get up and speak. Well, she didn't say she doesn't like to speak.
I don't. You did amazing.
I do not like to speak, to get up and speak.
There you guys got it.
I'm sorry. I don't like to get up to speak, but I am a therapist, and I encourage my clients to do things they do not want to do. So here I am. Thank you, Michelle. Let's see. I'm here to discuss the increase of reported anxiety and depression in adolescents. Again, my name is Aisha Reed Overbaugh. I'm a licensed independent social worker. I've practiced social work since 2003. And I've been a clinical social worker since 2010. And I own my own company, Full of Life Therapy, since I've been here. Let's see. I work with people who struggle with depression, anxiety, trauma, relationship issues. I work with individuals, couples, and families. I provide an inclusive practice where all populations and communities are welcome. I want all people to feel heard, cared for, validated, and understood without judgment. I do not work with children under 10. So, that population, I do not work with. Okay, so we will start with a mindful exercise. It's called 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. First, we'll start with a deep breath. And then, so I'd like for you to note 5 things that you see. Four things that you hear.
Me up.
3 things that you feel. 2 things that you smell. And 1 thing that you taste. Okay, this is a grounding exercise that helps you to stay in the moment and avoid negative thinking and worry. And this can be done anywhere. In the car, at work, at your desk, school students at their desk, walking through the halls. Sometimes that gets really anxiety driven for some students. But anyway, so it can be done anywhere. These are main stressors. Our adolescents' main stressors include school homework, extracurricular activities, transitions, and transitions are going to high school, transitioning to going to college, the idea of transitioning to move out, and so on and so forth. That is what our students, some of their concerns with transitions. Pressure to succeed, relationships, social challenges, and work for some. And then there's the new stressors facing our adolescents. And there is the COVID pandemic. It says here, in the first year of the COVID pandemic, global prevalence of anxiety and depression increased by 25%. And social media. It says here, spending more than 3 hours on social media per day puts adolescents at a higher risk for mental health problems. And then school shootings. It's common for students today to take a moment when entering classrooms or public places to spot the exit signs or carry their phones in their pockets in the case they need to call 911. I know growing up that actually wasn't a thing in my day, but I'm one. 3 leading pediatric organizations declared a national emergency, while the U.S. Surgeon General issued a special advisory on youth mental health, citing a 57% increase in suicides between 2007 and 2018. Okay, so I was researching this, and since 1968 is when they started calculating school shootings. And since I don't know that there was any, but in 1970, since 1970, there has been 2,052 school shootings. In 2021, September 23rd, of 50 incidents reported. And this was a 120% increase from 2020, which there was.
The takeaways from today?
Besides my relationship with God at the time was my relationship with my parents. They're here in the crowd, my dad's back there, my mom's over there. And they did a not so great job at the start. I remember there was a bit of a wrestle between whether or not I needed to get help for my mental health. But as time went on and they educated themselves more on what I was going through and educated themselves on what they were going through as well, we all came to realize we all kind of have some issues and need to get those addressed. So I started going to therapy back in 2017, I believe, somewhere around then. And that has been very beneficial. That was and still is very beneficial. But it wasn't really, it was mainly, that was helpful, but it was also having my parents as well to be another support system besides therapy. Because I think you can kind of get the idea of we send them to therapy or get them on medications that'll solve the issues and alleviate some of the pressure that that you as parents have to face with having children that struggle with mental illness. in reality that like it'll help, but like there's still a lot of responsibility that the parent has to take into consideration. And I just wanted to touch on like some of the things that my parents did that worked, some of the things that they didn't do that didn't work too well, but they worked on. I think the main thing was just being there to listen. They understood that it wasn't always the proper time to be a parent and to try to fix what I was going through, or try to talk me down from where I was at. It was more so just to listen to where I was and to be either metaphorically or quite literally a shoulder for me to cry on. And they did that very well. So there were a few times when like they would try to interject and be like, well, have you tried this? Did you think about it this way? Did you read this scripture? Things like that. And sometimes that would help, but most of the time it wouldn't. And it would kind of cause this like weird division between us. They worked on that and they realized that it was more so, let's just let him vent, let him say what he needs to say, and then we'll try to comfort him and give him advice if he wants to hear it, but in the main part just to be there, be a presence in his life, like when he's struggling or when I'm struggling, whether that's like physically being there or being over the phone. Because I know in the past, since I moved out, there have been a lot of times where I've called my mom or called my dad just to talk to them because like my day kind of sucked, or I need to vent, or just hearing their voices honestly was enough to get me into a better headspace. So that was some of the things that they did to help me. They're just facilitating. I know a lot of people have said, or before me, like facilitating like an environment that will invite your kid to want to open up to you and talk to you, and just being that pillar for them. Because like with the internet and with their friends, they can go to places for help and advice that aren't going to be beneficial like at all. I mean, there's some benefits for asking friends for advice and asking advice on the internet, but not really. So being present and letting them know, like you can, like obviously you can say like, if you need anything, I'm here to talk, but also just like facilitating those times. Like my dad would take me to and from team events sometimes, and we wouldn't really say anything for the most of the ride until we got like at our house and we just parked and we just talked for like a few minutes or like 30 minutes. And I'd always joke with him like, yeah, man, I should have recorded what you said, because that was like actually like good advice. I never did. But I just remember like the feeling I got of being close with him and being like, he understands what I'm going through and he has advice, and I don't know, it's just good to talk to him about like those experiences that I was having at the time. And with my mom, there are times when like I'd have a rough day at school or something or other, and I'd just go in her room where she was watching TV or doing work or something, and just lay with her and be like, hey, my day kind of sucked, kind of talk about it. And it was like having those opportunities to go to them that helped me get through some of the things I was struggling with, on top of like therapy and medication, of course. And then also like encouraging me to hang out with some people who I could see as mentors as well. I think that was mentioned earlier as well. Like Jeff Duncan, they helped encourage that relationship between me and him, for him to be like my discipler, because he was a team leader at the time. So going to him for advice, and then them going to him and then talking about ways to help me as well. Like they were involved in that relationship also. So they were like up to date on things like I wasn't really able to share with them at the time, but I would eventually get to. And like if there was something like, I remember there was a self-harm scare, and I didn't tell them, but I told Jeff, and Jeff realized like this is something that I need to talk to his parents about, so he did. So having like that trust between another adult or someone else who's responsible to inform you if your child's like needs any help and they're not at 100% comfortable going to you. So yeah, that's just pretty much the gist of what I had to share.
And then there are like 3 sections on it. So if you'll turn to that one, it's a lot of empty white space. What I like to do is, professionally, I'm a coach, and so I like to make things practical. You know, it's like, gosh, you've learned so many wonderful things today, and that's great, but what I want to do is make it practical, and how can it change your life? How can it change how you view things, how you interact with others? How can it impact you personally? That's the point of this page. I'm going to be quiet for a few moments, and what I want you to do is think through what you've learned today. Rather than rushing on to the next thing after today, I want you to just take a few moments, just think through what you've learned today, and list out a few key takeaways. I feel like it was 15 to 19. Oh my gosh, I remember just being like, I don't even know what to do with this kid anymore. Our 17-year-old was around 17, our second, he had been very compliant. He was the easy kid. And then at 17, he just wasn't compliant anymore. And we're like, who is this kid? And then our 17-year-old now, gosh, this last year has just been hard for her. She's been through so much. I'll try not to cry. She's just been through a lot, and trying to figure out how to support her, gosh, it's hard. And by the grace of God, our 12-year-old is still in the good years. He still gives me hugs and likes me, so it's fabulous. You need that. Oh my goodness. Okay, so just in evaluating our experiences and raising these 4 wonderful human beings, what if there were 2 things I could share with you today? This is kind of where I wanted to start. So in connecting with your teenager, number 1, be available. Just be available. I feel like that our greatest conversations were unplanned, unscheduled times where they just started sharing, right? Maybe they had a crappy day and I was cooking dinner or sitting down and they found me and just shared about it. But in order to be available, here's the next thing. You have to create margin. You have to create margin. You can't plan every moment in your day. You can't pack it full of everything or be stressed or, like all the things. You have to be proactive in creating margin in your day. What can you eliminate from your calendar? What can you eliminate from your commitments so that you can be available? Having margin, there are decisions that lead up to that. The other thing that facilitated being available was let go of control. Ooh, that's a tough one. Ooh, it hurts, right? Let go of control. Uh-oh, we got some pointing fingers over here. Let go of control. This is a hard one. And I'm a coach by trade, so I'm very practical, okay? So I don't know all the professional words and all the professional things. I'm just saying from my experience. But in this point in their development, they're not a child anymore. They don't need you involved in everything. They don't need you telling them everything. And you can see by their face, they don't want to hear everything, right? So you need to understand that as a teenager, they are an adult in training, okay? This is part of their development, is you backing off and them stepping up and stepping out a little bit more. It's not always pretty. A lot of times it's ugly, but it's part of their development. We've got to understand that and back off a little bit. So letting go of control. And part of this was, I remember, gosh, with the first 2 especially, there are times where, oh my gosh, their decisions did not like them at all. But you know what? They were theirs to make and their consequences to feel. If I were to step in and try to save them, what am I teaching them? What was I teaching them about life and how life was going to treat them, right? So sometimes we've got to back off, get our hands out of the situation and let them feel it, good or bad.
but they can own it. They can own those decisions because we weren't controlling that. So provide some healthy parameters and boundaries, absolutely. But have a good balance. They're just basic things, but know that it's your job to be releasing control and backing off. Just don't micromanage, right? That's the thing that I'm trying to say. And this may step on a few toes, but if you have the need to micromanage, pay attention to that. There's a reason that you feel the need to micromanage and control. And my guess is it's more about you than it is about them. So that's an area where you could do some exploration. Why do you need to micromanage? Why do you need to control everything? What about their decisions, what is bringing up anxiety in you? That's where some of your exploration can be. We have some lovely ladies that you can meet with and talk to about that. That I'm sure be more than happy to help you dive into that a little bit more. Okay, so now, again, let's make it practical. The next point of make it personal. What do you need to do based on where we were going, what we were just talking through? What do you need to do to allow for more of this? And go ahead and just write down a sentence or two. And I told her that I was talking about her in my talk, and she was like, what? And I was like, no, it's more about me than it is you. And I'm just like, okay. When she was younger, she was getting ready to go out on a date with her dad. And I was in the bathroom helping her get ready. This was a beautiful thing. You know, she was feeling so special. And I noticed myself getting agitated and irritated and lashing out at her. And it wasn't pretty. And just having these very negative thoughts. And it was coming out to her. So I could tell I was, aware enough that I needed to remove myself from the situation. So I did, and I asked my son, I said, please just get a picture of them before they go, because she looks so beautiful. And so we did, because I'm a scrapbooker, so I love photos. So I was like, please capture the moment. And so they went out, and I collapsed in tears. He's such a good man. He's helped with my tears many, many times. So I removed myself, had my son take the picture, and then I just collapsed in tears. I prayed, I journaled, I processed, and I realized that this situation was triggering a wounding event for me. I grew up with a very angry, depressed, explosive father. And so we didn't have those moments. We didn't have those tender moments. So here I was helping her have one, and it triggered me. So I had a choice. Was I going to continue the pattern? Right? I could do nothing, change nothing, continue the hurtful pattern, right? And lashing out in my anger from pain. But I said no. Heck no. The pattern stops here. And so I chose to work on myself, to do the healing work, to say, what's going on here? Why did that trigger me? What was that tapping from the past? And so I did the work. So this is why it's so important for point 2. Do your own healing work. Do your own healing work. You need to spend time on you, not in a selfish way, in a healthy way, so that your interactions with your team can be about them and not you, right? I could have made that moment about me and continued to get mad at my daughter because she didn't appreciate the wonderful father she had. I'm sure she was complaining and attitude, and so I was mad that she didn't understand. But that's unfair to put that on her, right? She doesn't know yet. She'll get there. One day she'll understand what a great father she has. That wasn't her problem, that was mine. That was my pain coming into that moment. So this is how we can have an interaction that can be heightened because we're misplacing anger, we're misplacing sadness, grief, shame, and we're putting it on our teenager in that moment when it has nothing to do with them. Yeah. That's why this is so important. If you get nothing else from my talk today, gosh, this is why I do what I do, is to help you do your healing work so that especially those in your immediate family and even around that are benefited by you doing the work. Now, the few points here. Healing work is hard. Yes, it's not easy, but it is necessary for growth. We must change and learn and grow. That's what we're designed to do. We're not designed to be stagnant. And this is the gift that you get to give the next generation, is you being the healthiest version of you is the best thing you can do to empower and equip the next generation. Next point, hard circumstances. Now again, this one might step on a few toes, but bear with me. Hard circumstances cause us to be aware of things we would rather ignore or forget. Right? Think of a hard situation recently. What we want to do is complain, focus on the negatives, blame it on the other person, that idiot over there. If they hadn't done that, right? Like that's what we want to do. But what if we could look at it from a different angle? What if those hard circumstances are for you? Not that idiot, right? What if it's for you? What is this bringing about in you? If you could pause and consider it, what is the lesson or the gift for you in this? Just sit in that for a moment. Maybe think about a recent situation that's been hard. You've been pointing a finger. But what is it calling out in you? Okay, for the next point, I'm sure y'all can relate. Does anyone run out of time and just doesn't get to the things they meant to do? Okay, I was supposed to have this very cool visual, and I didn't get to it. So I need you to activate your imagination, and I want you to think of 2 cans. Just 2, whatever's on them, use your imagination there, whatever they, and I want you to imagine they're empty, but there are lots of holes. Okay, so like lots of holes that have punctured the cans. We are the cans, and the holes are the wounding events that have happened to you. Some we choose, some we do not. So imagine these 2 cans. Now I want you to imagine sand being poured into them. Where's the sand gonna go? Wounds cause us to be leaky, right? We just leak sometimes. Gosh, it smells so right. Healing work. Imagine one of the cans. You are that can. You've chosen to do healing work. You've done some of the things that these people, wonderful people have shared today from their experience or their training, right? You've done some of those things. I want you to imagine taking tape and taping up some of those holes. Duct tape, yes, with duct tape. Thank you for clarifying. Now I want you to imagine pouring sand in that same can compared to the other can. Which one's going to hold more? The duct tape one. And the cool thing is now imagine you can pour it out. You can pour it out, right? You're able to hold something and be able to pour it out for somebody else. That's the next point. Healing work increases your capacity for others. As you are intentional and do that healing work, you're able to hold and receive more to be able to pour out and help others. Okay, to kind of land the plane here, you might be thinking with all this talk about these heavier topics and trauma and wounding and anxiety and depression and school shootings and all the things, but how do you do this healing work? Let's get practical, okay? So some of the things have been already mentioned today, think back through some of the talks. Maybe it's connecting with others, recognizing that mind, body, soul connection, mindfulness exercise, right? Food choices, exercising. From my personal experience, what helped me that heal the most was meeting with a counselor, therapist, journaling, prayer, meditation, being in nature, and being active, like movement, helped me the most because it is a release. And I actually have been working a lot more hours lately doing a desk job, and I am feeling it. My exercise is part of my mental health routine. When I am exercising, I'm releasing stress, I'm literally changing my brain and how it thinks, how I view situations. I can be more positive, and I just can sense my mood's been lower over the last few weeks as I've had to work more. And so movement is so, so, so important. So whatever that is for you, find it, do it, make it happen. You will absolutely notice a difference in how you function, how you think, how you operate. So for you, for those healing things, what nourishes your soul is one way to say it. Another way to say it is what makes you feel alive. Is that movement? Is it walking in nature? Is it connecting with a friend? Is it being in solitude? Right? Whatever those things are that make you feel more alive is part of your healing routine. Okay. So let's make it personal. What steps do you need to take to do your healing work? What is that for you? Could be anything that has been brought up today, or maybe you're just sensing, gosh, this is